Day 1055 of this Trump administration, and Donald Trump is now the fourth president in our history to be brought to the brink of impeachment. This morning, Democrats in the House unveiled two articles against the president: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Tomorrow night, the Judiciary Committee announced they will start the markup phase, the debate over the language in the articles. The two articles are tightly focused on just the one subject: Trump's actions to pressure Ukraine for political investigations. And the reasoning is made clear in the language, and we quote from the articles: President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. That last part, of course, requires a trial and a vote in the Senate. The document, however, continues, and we quote: President Trump thus interposed the powers of the presidency against the lawful subpoenas of the House of Representatives and assumed to himself functions and judgments necessary to the exercise of the sole power of impeachment vested by the Constitution and the House of Representatives. In the history of the Republic, no president has ever ordered the complete defiance of an impeachment inquiry or sought to obstruct and impede so comprehensively the ability of the House of Representatives to investigate high crimes and misdemeanors. This abuse of office served to cover up the president's own repeated misconduct and to seize and control the power of impeachment, and thus to nullify a vital constitutional safeguard vested solely in the House of Representatives. The Democrats have been accused of rushing this, of being in a hurry to push this through. Today, Adam Schiff addressed that.
The argument, why don't you just wait, amounts to this: why don't you just let him cheat in one more election? Why not let him cheat just one more time? Why not let him have foreign help just one more time? That is what that argument amounts to.
About an hour after that, Speaker Pelosi joined members of her caucus to announce that Democrats and the White House had reached an agreement to move forward with the White House replacement for NAFTA. Tonight, during a rally in Hershey, PA, Trump said the timing of today's events was orchestrated by the Democrats.
We've been waiting for a long time for Nancy Pelosi to announce USMCA. And she did it on the same day that they announced that they are going to impeach. You know why? It's a huge deal. And it plays down the impeachment because they're embarrassed by the impeachment.
About the Congress voting soon on his trade deal part that he announced tonight, the Senate Majority Leader, who controls the legislative calendar, does not appear to agree with that.
We will not be doing USMCA in the Senate between now and the end of next week. That'll have to come up, in all likelihood, right after the trial is finished in the Senate. You're wondering when you have to come back, right? It'll be right around the time the bowl game's end. So how about that?
Speaking of the impeachment trial, the Washington Examiner also reports the White House may not get a chance to have the witnesses it wants. Quote, Senate Republicans do not expect to call witnesses President Trump might want to hear from most in an impeachment trial, conceding there are not the votes to summon key figures such as Hunter Biden and the unidentified government whistleblower whose complaint sparked the process. Amid all that, the controversy over the Department of Justice Inspector General's report on the FBI's Russia investigation continues to grow. That report found no evidence of government spying, no evidence of political bias on the part of the agents. It did note several errors and irregularities during that inquiry. Tomorrow, the Inspector General himself, Michael Horowitz, will testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee to answer for his work, in effect. Here's what the president had to say about Horowitz as he offered a straight-up misrepresentation of the report's findings.
This report was great by the IG, especially since he was appointed by President Barack Hussein Obama.
Attorney General Barr is voicing his objections to the IG report. Here's what he told our colleague Pete Williams.
In one area, I do disagree with the IG, and that was whether there was sufficient predication to open a full-blown counterintelligence investigation, specifically using the techniques that they did to collect intelligence about the Trump campaign. The core statement, in my opinion, by the IG is that these irregularities, these misstatements, these omissions were not satisfactorily explained. And I think that leaves open the possibility to infer bad faith.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.